Mr. Pat here, and I'm super excited for today's lesson because we'll be learning about worms and composting and how they break down our food to create a very nutritional product for our soil, our plants, our flowers, you name it. So like always, everyone come gather in, put on your EcoSpaces thinking cap because we're ready to dive right in and get our hands dirty. So this activity will explore decomposition and composting while also showing everyone how to make their own vermiculture system, or worm bin for short. So let's get right into it. So when you're home, what type of things do you tend to throw away? Are you throwing away cans, glass jars, plastic bottles, anything? Let me know right now, yell it as loud as you can. Come on, come on, come on. All right, I'm hearing some wood too. More plastic, clothes, that was a good one. Perfect, I heard so many great answers. Now some of the trash that we do throw out can be recycled, like these cans, plastic, cardboard, wood, but some things cannot, like our food waste. But what happens to dead animals, leaves, even apples that fallen off the tree in nature? Do they just pile up year after year? Of course not. All these types of organic materials will rot, decompose, and then return back to the soil, just like our yard trimmings and food waste would do. In order for decomposition to happen, we need things such as decomposers to break down all that food. And once they break down all that food, everything returns to the soil for all our plants and flowers to grow big and strong. We like to call this turning trash into garden treasure. And these decomposers are basically like nature's little recycling centers. Now with our worm bin, we're going to be able to create our very own little ecosystem for our worms to thrive and live in. Now with traditional composting, that's essentially a system of turning our organic waste like leaves or food into a soil membrane that's going to make our plants grow big and strong. Now with vermicomposting, or our worm bin, we're basically just adding worms into the mix. And these worms are going to break down all our food really, really quickly. And in the end, they're going to provide this enriching source of nutrients for our plants. And we call it worm castings or vermicompost, but essentially those are just fancy words for worm poop. So now let's take a deeper dive into the anatomy of a worm with this little poster right here. So we'll start from the top where their head is. So obviously this is where all the food comes in, and once it goes through the esophagus, it'll pass through the 5 hearts. Yes, 5 hearts in that little body. But after the food passes through the esophagus, it's going to end up in the crop, as you see right there after the hearts. Now this is where the food is temporarily stored. And then after, all that food is going to travel to the gizzard. Now this is where the fun comes in, because the gizzard breaks everything down. It's almost like a garbage disposal in your sink, and it's going to make everything super, super small and ground up. And after that, it's going to travel into the intestines. Now this is where all that food is going to be absorbed and digested into the bloodstream of the worm. Then after, just like humans, it's going to come out as worm poop. Like I mentioned before, this is going to be a super beneficial nutrient for our plants to grow big and strong. And now it's time to get out of this kitchen and go upstairs because I'm going to show everyone my own worm bin. And yes, it is inside. It's upstairs in a closet. So I just want to show and reiterate everyone that vermicomposting and our worm bins can be done all year long, inside and outside, as long as you have the conditions right. So here we are. And there's my worm bin with my little drawings on it. So here's another look at the worm bin I have, and I got creative with the design on top, and everyone could be as creative as they want. But as you can see, there are holes all over the bin. This helps them to breathe, but another fun fact is that worms actually breathe through their skin. So it's very important that you have a nice, somewhat moist environment. They describe it as, you want it as moist as a wrung out sponge. So here is another look. I like to have this on top to keep all the moisture in. It's just a piece of newspaper that everyone should have. And you open it up and you see all those little bits of green. That used to be a whole collard leaf, but they were really breaking it down. Worms eat about half their body weight in a day or even more. So I have about 250 worms in this bin, so they go through a lot of food in a very little time. Another important thing to remember if you're ever going to make your worm bin is the conditions that they like to live in. So this bin, they like to be around 55 to 70 degrees like Fahrenheit. So they don't like it too hot and they don't like it too cold. It'll stunt their growth and it'll prohibit them from working hard and breaking down all that food. So that's why I keep it in my closet away from any vents or windows or anything like that to make sure I'm giving my worms the best possible conditions to thrive. So now let's talk about what do they even eat. So in nature, worms will usually eat dead leaves, grass clippings, even dirt. But in our worm bins, they're gonna have a completely different diet. So what I feed my worms and what they really like is fruit and vegetable scraps. You don't have to buy anything for them. They usually just like to eat the scraps you leave over, like when you're cutting a carrot and you shave it off, you can use those scraps and put it in here. They love all that stuff. They also love cleaned out eggshells. They love tea bags. They love coffee filters and coffee grounds. They're gonna love all this stuff. And also, newspapers are a good thing, or those cardboard egg cartons. They act as bedding, but they will also eat that and break it down as well. Now, what not to feed your worms. So we do not want to feed them any meat or dairy products. They will not be able to break it down as quick or at all really, and they don't like it to begin with. Also, it's going to bring a lot of bad smell to your worm bin and it might attract vermin or insects, and we do not want that, especially if it's in my closet. We also don't want to feed them very acidic or citrusy fruits like lemons, limes, or even pineapples. At some point in your little journey, after a few months or many months, your worm bin is going to be ready to harvest all that worm poop for your soil and your plants. But how do you go about separating your worms and getting all that out for your plants? Well, I'll show you 3 different ways. So one of the ways is to use food, because obviously our worms like to eat. So say I want to harvest, I would probably put food on one side, wait a little bit for all the worms to migrate over to that side, and then collect from the side that they're not in. Now that's one method. Another method is by using light. Now they do not like light or heat, and they will burrow down if there's light. So if I had a lamp right on top shining, they would just move down deeper into the worm bin. And then I'll be able to harvest from the top without having any worms to separate from. Now the third method is using a screen. Now I'll show you a little screen that I made. Now here is that screen that I made. I just took together some pieces of wood, some screws, and this hardwood cloth, and then I just put it together. So this will be able to sift out all the worm poop and keep the worms on the top. That's essentially it for the worm bin. I mean, all you really need is just the worms, some newspaper, some cardboard, like the egg cartons, like right here would be perfect to use as the bedding. You put it all in there, make it moist like a wrung out sponge, and then you start feeding them food. And over time, they'll break everything down. Now, it's really important to maintain your bin and have the perfect environment for your worms. So I'll go over a few tips to help you if there's any issues that arise. If your bin happens to get a little smelly, you're probably feeding it too much food and they're not breaking down all that food as quick as you'd want them to be. So I would recommend just feeding them less, and then at some point you'll get a sense of how much your worms eat, and you really just be stuck to a schedule at that point. Next is, what if your bin is too dry? You know you don't want your bins to be too dry because your worms will shrivel up and die, unfortunately. They need a nice, somewhat moist environment. So if your bin is too dry, I recommend adding some wet pieces of newspaper that's, wrung out, obviously, not sopping wet, or add food that has high water content. Like cucumbers has a lot of water in there, and that would help balance everything out. But what if your bin is too wet? We also don't want them drowning, obviously. So if your bin is too wet, add in dry newspaper. Don't have to wet it or anything. That's going to absorb all that moisture, and it's going to help balance it out once again. And one last one is, say you see some fruit flies flying around your bin. That's mostly because they're trying to get to that food. One way to stop this is by burying your food. So when you get your bin, I would just dig a little hole, like right there, and in that hole, stick in your food and then cover it back up. put the newspaper back over, and then put the top back on and seal it tight. I've never had a problem with fruit flies doing this, so I'll definitely recommend that if you ever happen to have any fruit flies bothering you. I hope everyone liked seeing my worm bin today. I had so much fun, and also I love doing this because not only do I basically have pets that I'm not allergic to, but I'm also really helping out the earth. About 25% of our household organic waste can be composted. Worms can break this down and create that worm poop for our soil, our garden, our plants, and they're gonna grow huge and nutritious and strong. So that's why I love doing this, and hopefully all of y'all will eventually make your own worm bin when you want to. But thank you again for coming out to today's lesson, and I'll see everyone next week. Bye.